regret and grace can't be roommates. That is something I wrestled with because I wanted to have God's grace,
Mm.
but I wanted to hold on a little bit to regret because I was still a little bit mad at myself. Ultimately, what I learned is that we don't want to make those mistakes. We don't want to have regret about something we didn't do or should have done. But if that happens, that becomes this opportunity for you to experience God's grace in a way that you might not have before.
Welcome back to Living the Grace Life. I'm your host, Jennifer Sakata, and you've made your way to the corner of real grace for your real life. We've all asked these questions in one form or another. Is this life all there is? Is God always good? Is God's plan enough? My guest today found herself mired in these desperate questions after being diagnosed with a serious heart condition despite stellar checkups and being in what everybody else thought was good health. Lorianne Wood is an author and speaker who lives with her husband in an empty nest in beautiful Northwest Arkansas. Lorianne writes and speaks to encourage deep faith questions along the detours of life. Her work's been published in several anthologies and dozens of print and online venues, including Bella Grace Magazine and the New York Times. Lorianne's award-winning book, check that, multi-award-winning book, Divine Detour, The Path You'd Never Choose Can Lead to the Faith You've Always Wanted, was published by Cross River Media. Lorianne is a deeply rooted grace gal, too, and her passion is to walk alongside others in their unwanted paths. So if you've ever wrestled with life's hardest questions or wondered where God's grace is when literally you're fighting for your life, then you'll want to lean into our conversation. Lorianne, welcome to Living the Grace Life.
Jennifer, it's such an honor to be here. Thank you.
Oh, so glad to have you. So you live in beautiful Northwest Arkansas is how you describe it. I know very little about Arkansas. In fact, I think the only thing I know about it is it's where the Brandon Burlsworth story unfolded, right, with the Arkansas Razorbacks all those years ago. His life, for some of you have seen the movie. If you haven't, I'm sorry, spoiler alert. He was one of the greatest walk-ons in football history, and tragically, his life ended in a car accident, but resulted in deepened faith for so many who watched his life unfold. So anyway, we're not here to talk about Brandon Burlsworth, but that's Arkansas. Tell us a little more. What's it like there? And is it cold right now like it is here?
It is cold. It is cold, but that's one of the things I love about it is we get all the seasons and we get the
Oh,
full
nice.
thing. We get,
That's great.
the winter, we get the summer. The fall is my favorite. It's beautiful. We have a lot of trees. It's a very forested area where we live, and the colors are just, it's always too short for me. Fall goes too
Mm.
fast. But the other thing you might not know about Northwest Arkansas is it's the home of Walmart. So
What?
yeah, I thought that's what you were gonna say when you said the only thing I know about Northwest Arkansas. I thought, I bet she knows.
I
But
had
yeah,
no idea.
no, I know. And if you turn to the back of all of your products that are Walmart branded, you'll see
Yes.
Bentonville, Arkansas at the bottom. So
Okay.
you'll
Well,
think of
my
me.
next trip to Walmart, I will be thinking about you, Lorianne. That is quite the
Exactly.
claim to fame. Okay. Yeah, and don't be deceived. I don't know a lot about football. I just look for great movies to watch with our teen boys, and that Brandon Burlsworth story was a great one and says a lot about
Yes.
the people in Arkansas.
Oh, yes. It's a beautiful story. We actually live about 30 minutes from the University of Arkansas. That's a big part of our history and who we are and the culture here.
Lorianne, tell us about yourself and how you came to life with Jesus. Did you grow up in a Christian home, or were you just sort of left to figure it all out on your own?
Mm. I did grow up in a Christian home, and I don't think I can remember a time when I didn't know that God was real,
What a
that I didn't
blessing.
know about God. Yes, I think I can trace back my knowledge of God and my feelings of him being there almost to the same time as me knowing about my parents. It was just that
Wow.
deep and long, and my mother was deeply spiritual, and so I was very blessed to be given that sort of
Mhm.
heritage and that
Mhm.
upbringing and have that wrap around me. But if you have been enveloped in this love of God and the knowledge of Him, when you end up on a detour in life like I did,
Mm.
it makes it a little bit more challenging because you're weighing that faith that you've been given and you almost feel this betrayal.
Huh.
And so I was wrestling with that as I was wrestling with the health situation that I found myself in.
Take us back
Mhm.
to how that faith walk got started, and I'm guessing it has something to do with 2015.
Mm, it did. I think I was in a place in my early adult life where I was raising my children. We were very active in the church. We raised our kids in the church, part of church leadership. And we had even taught for 10 summers on a mission trip in Mexico. My husband
Oh
and I
my
had taught
goodness.
adult classes. And so we were just really entrenched. And I think at that point I didn't realize it, but I had kind of
Mm.
a transactional relationship with religion and with my belief and my faith. And when I came upon 2015, that was when I realized that, this isn't quite what I need right now because the
Mhm.
transaction wasn't really working out anymore. And and so I went through that period of time and I was
Mm.
going through the motions. I felt faithful. I felt that God was with me those early mothering years all the way up through 2015. And if someone had asked me, I would say, "Oh yes, I
Mhm.
have a deep faith." But what I didn't realize is that it had never really been challenged in a meaningful way. And so that is when that idea of the detour came into my
Mm.
mind because I felt like I had been pushed off on a path I didn't want to be on. And at that point, I thought, what good is my faith?
Hmm.
And then the subtitle came, The Faith That You've Always Wanted, because I wanted that faith that I could see in my mother, where when things
Sure.
weren't going, you know, life didn't always go like she wanted it to. She leaned in and she felt it.
Yes.
And so that was what I was striving for and didn't really know what it would take to get there.
You did get there and you are there now, but what was it? What was your on ramp to getting
Mhm.
there?
Yeah. Well, my on-ramp was sort of an off-ramp,
Mm.
honestly. I was, like so many people, I think I had planned my life. I
Mm.
had my children. Some were still at home. I had some in college, and I kind of knew how I wanted my life to go. And I'm a very much a planner and
Mm.
a
Me too, friend.
proactive. Yeah.
I get that. I like my ducks in a row.
Yes, and it usually works out so beautifully.
Really?
Well, in my mind, it
Maybe not
does.
so much. Okay. Yeah.
But I came upon 2015. It was Thanksgiving week that year,
Mhm.
and I had children at home. I had some coming home for the week, and I knew it was gonna be a busy week. I had some momming to do, but I just wasn't feeling well. I was kinda sluggish. I felt like I didn't have the energy, which was really strange for me, especially with the adrenaline of the holiday and having all my kids back home, and
Sure.
I didn't feel well. I went to convenient care on Sunday of that week, and then I just kept getting worse, really. I kinda went downhill. I spent Thanksgiving Day in bed because
Oh,
and
so
that
disappointing.
you understand as a mama
Yes.
that I could hear,
Mm.
everything going on. I could hear laughter and dishes and food
Sure.
being prepared, and I just couldn't get out of bed. And I thought, "This is a really bad case of the flu or something, and I'm
Makes
gonna"
sense. Yeah.
yeah, get back on my feet. I'm gonna be fine. I went to, convenient care again the day before that, and they had given me an antibiotic, but my husband got up and said, "You are not getting better, we're going to the doctor." He took me to our PCP, and he listened to my heart with a stethoscope, and he said, "If we're lucky, it's pneumonia."
Oh my.
And
Mm.
that was hard to hear because I had always been a very healthy person. I'd always had low blood pressure and low cholesterol, and I had no family history. I had no risk factors. They
You
have
were doing all
no
the right
idea.
things. Mhm.
Yes. They took a chest x-ray, and what they found was, instead of pneumonia, they found an extremely enlarged heart. And my Cleveland Clinic doctor later told me it
Oh.
was the largest heart she'd ever seen.
Oh my.
And I just had no idea. It was actually functioning. They take a reading called an ejection fraction,
Yes, yes.
and mine was at 6% when they admitted me into cardiac ICU.
Oh my
So
goodness.
this started this kind of cascade of events that came out of nowhere. I went to the doctor expecting to get an antibiotic,
Mm.
and he wouldn't even let me go home. He directly admitted me into ICU from the doctor's office. So I spent a couple weeks there, and they sent me home with a life vest, which is an external defibrillator, and a hospice binder. And
Oh
then
my
we sort of
goodness.
waited. And I have an internal device now. I take a whole lot of medication. There's a lot more to the story that it goes on with its own ups and downs. But I have learned that heart failure, and there are so many other ailments like this, is a chronic progressive disease. It never goes away,
Mm.
and it really only goes in one direction
Mm.
because the heart, at this point, the heart can't heal itself.
Mhm.
And so we deal with the damage that we have in the ways that medical science can help us, and that's kind of where I'm at.
Mhm. So that's the, if you will, the circumstance of
Mm.
your situation is you are in heart failure. Uh, Somewhere along the way, your faith began to grow in a way you would not have expected. How did you get from doctor's office, pneumonia would be best case scenario, to I have heart failure and now what?
Mhm. Yeah, so we were sort of placed in this 16-month holding period after I left the hospital, and I was so surrounded by people that cared about me.
Mm.
We were talking about community, and it that is when community was on full force for me. I was on prayer chains where people were praying around the clock
Mm.
for me.
Mhm.
And amazingly, it's been over 9 years and some of them still are, if you can believe that.
Really? Oh, that's
Yeah.
amazing. Oh,
It it's
what a
it's a
gift.
blessing. We were just so surrounded by so much support in, spiritually and physically, but in those 16 months, I was just barely hanging on. I wasn't getting any better. And I had a surgery during that time. I still wasn't getting any better. And then a funny thing happened. 16 months into this, I came down with appendicitis. And I
Oh, I'm
thought,
so sorry.
I no. And I thought, of all things, they looked at me and they said, "You need your appendix out, but there's not a doctor that will perform surgery
Sure.
on you with your heart that week." And they were at a real quandary about what to do. And they did another echo to find out what my EF was, just to kind of see what they were actually dealing with at that point. Just completely out of the blue, my heart function had somehow returned to near normal at that moment.
What?
Yes.
Oh my miracles. Oh my goodness.
Yes. Yes. And I'm in the hospital. They're
Wow.
wondering if they can take my appendix out. They tell me this and
Mm.
immediately whisk me into surgery to get my appendix out. And I'm going on the way down the hall to surgery.
Mhm.
I'm going, I just got my life back.
Mm.
I just got
Mhm.
my life back. And I thought that was the answer to all of our prayers. I thought I was seeing God's provision and his care. And I thought, this is a story I'm going to tell. And
Mm.
I did tell it and write about it for several months, almost a year, and then my heart function started to drop again, and I found myself in active heart failure. At the time, I looked at that as something that got ripped away from me. And I know that there's people listening who have had a blessing that they've been given that I call kind of a temporary blessing,
Mm.
and then it's gone. They may have lost a child or some other situation that they thought they would have so much longer, and it was gone.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was cheated a little bit. I felt like I was robbed, kind of. And I felt that way for several months, and a friend of mine said, "Have you ever thought that maybe God put your heart at normal functioning for that moment so you could get your appendix out and survive and continue on doing what you're doing?"
Whoa. That's a good friend. That's a
That's a
wise
good
friend.
friend. And I hadn't. I hadn't, because the pain of that being ripped away from me
Yeah.
clouded. And again, we're at community saying, "Look at what I see. I know
Mm-hmm.
what you're seeing, but look at it from my angle."
Mm-hmm.
And that started me on this idea of, okay, I had been keeping a journal for a while just about heart. I was trying to keep people up to date and making notes in my journal about my heart. And then when nothing was happening, I started to tiptoe into these faith questions that felt a little bit risky. They felt a little bit like I was throwing that heirloom faith away that I had.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just had to do it. So I kept that journal, and that journal became the springboard for so much of the writing that I do. And I know you know this, Jennifer, but people say to write from your scars and not from your wounds.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me about 3 years before I ever shared anything from my journal, which that's the wounds. The journal's
Yes.
my wounds.
Yes.
But the value of that part is that people can see, people who are wounded can read the wound part and say, "Yeah, that's where I'm at. That's what I'm feeling."
Mm-hmm.
But then I have the perspective of time to see it for what it really was. Just like that normal reading, to get my appendix out, I didn't see it for what it was at the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that about our wounds, but also about our scars, that they become that space that we can then speak out of as we walk with others in their woundedness too. I want to make sure I get this right. You've been in the hospital for 16 months, then you have a bit of a reprieve. You go home, you get appendicitis. They check your EF, which is off the charts, amazing, miraculously restored enough for you to receive surgery. And then come the questions, some of
Mhm.
life's hardest questions.
Yes. I left after my appendectomy thinking that I was walking out of there without heart failure as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I lived in that space for a while. But when my heart function started to gradually decrease and come back down and down and down, that's when my writing took a little bit of a turn, because
Mm.
I was not, at first, I was writing about, just being in this temporary hard space and what we do with our faith until we can get back to God's promises and God's provision. And when I found it falling off the other side, it threw me for a loop, but I started to just write, and I think that was what maybe healed my soul more than anything, was just to get into that and say, "I don't know where this is going. I'm not writing it to write a book. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
writing." And so I was writing and writing and writing, and I thought, "What in the world does any of this have to
Mm.
do with each other?" I remember being in a Bible class, and we were talking about Jesus and the 3 temptations and being in the desert,
Mm.
and at that moment, it occurred to me, because I had always latched on to the idea of detour. Even when I
Mm-hmm.
was just writing about my health, I'm like, "This feels like a detour.
Huh.
I'm off the main road.
It's like,
I'm gonna get back on."
mm-hmm.
And I heard that story about Jesus being detoured into the desert. He was poised to begin his public ministry. He was
Mm.
ready. That's what he
Mhm.
came for. And then God said, well, let's just take this little detour into the desert. And I related to that. And then I started digging into the temptations he faced, and they started to resonate with what was rolling around in my head. And I came to this realization that those temptations, like any temptation, is really just an internal question that we ask ourselves. Well, when we're tempted, we're asking things like, should I? What if I
Mm.
did?
Mhm.
What would happen if I don't? Is it worth it? And Jesus was doing that in his own being fully human. When I started to look at my writing, I realized that what I was writing about were those same 3 issues. When he was detoured into the desert, the first thing in the book of John was that Satan tempted him to turn those stones into bread.
Mhm.
He had to be thinking, if this life is all there is, then I should turn those stones
Sure.
into bread.
Mhm.
Part of what I was wrestling with in my detour was, is this life all there is?
Mm.
And the second one is what I called a question of doubt. Is God always good? We
Yep.
can see things going on in our life, in the lives of the people we love that we know are faithful, innocent people, that it isn't good. When Satan said, go ahead and jump from the cliff, you're not even going to hit your head on a rock because
Mm.
God's going to scoop you up and save you because he loves you. He won't let you get hurt. I wanted to believe that I've been a believer all my life. I've felt God's presence. He's not going to let something bad ultimately happen to me. And I remember even someone at church in those months where nothing was happening initially said, God has to do something. There's too many people
Mm.
praying. He has
Mhm.
to do something.
Mm.
And I thought, if he's good, he has to do something.
And then
That
you
was
have a
my
third
goal.
question.
The third question is what I call a question of control.
Mm. Oh,
And
we can
that,
relate to that one.
oh,
Us ducks in a
100%.
row, girls. Yes.
You know, I know. And I have people ask me, which one was the hardest one for you? Hands
Mm.
down, this one was hard. I
This would
want to
be
help
mine
God
too.
out.
Mhm. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. We've got good ideas, right?
Yes, we do. We have good experience and good ideas, and we're moms. And
And
enough
what more
said.
do you need, right? Enough said.
But even as I was dealing with the depths of my diagnosis and people saying, you have 6 months to live, I still felt like I could fix it somehow. And I knew if I couldn't, I thought, I know God will. I was leaning on that question
Yeah.
that my church member had said, God has to do something.
Mhm.
This is similar to when Satan asked Jesus to bow down and all the kingdoms will be yours. I know this isn't God's plan, but if you'll
Mm.
just bow down, this will happen. And wouldn't that be better than God's plan? And I wanted to believe,
Mm.
although I wouldn't have admitted it, that my life trajectory was largely up to me. When I didn't see that happening, I didn't know if God's plan was enough. As my heart function fell further and further,
Mm.
I felt less confident
Yeah.
in God's plan and had to wrestle a lot with that question of control.
Mhm. These are very relatable questions, and I love your perspective on questions. We tend to think of questions as an indicator of a lack of faith or
Mhm.
a lack of understanding or a lack of trust, but that's not your perspective. In fact, there was one of the things you said in the book that really caught my attention. You said, "Doubt is not the opposite of faith. Indifference is." What do you mean by that? Help us
Mhm.
unpack that a bit.
I think about that time when I told you I felt like my mother had given me this heirloom faith that was so precious. And it was like I had this vase that I was afraid if I got it down from the shelf and used it
Mhm.
in this hard season of my life, in this rough and tumble thing that I was going through, that I would break it.
Hmm.
And I didn't want to break it. I wanted it to stay intact. I wanted to hand that faith down to my kids. And so my thought was, I'm going to put that faith on a shelf
Hmm.
and I'm going to maybe bubble wrap it, maybe even put it in the attic, but I'm going to put
Sure.
it away and I'm going to come back to faith when my life makes sense. Because right
Oh,
now,
yeah. I
it's
think,
not matching up. In the meantime, while my faith is up on the shelf, I'm searching online about latest heart failure treatments and what can we do and how do I do this and what should my diet be. I'm ordering books and reading and all the things trying to get that under control. And when nothing was happening, I realized at some point in that long stretch of those months that if I didn't go back to my faith, I ran the risk of never coming back at all.
hmm.
So I got that faith down and I wrestled with it. And I asked God questions and I came back to it again and again and again. And the beautiful part was that when I decided it was okay to ask those questions that honestly I was a little embarrassed to have at my age in my stage of life, he was top of mind every day. When I would wake
Oh,
up,
love that.
I'd be like, okay, God, we're
Hmm.
going at this. What's going on? But he never left me. He was there. And it was my lifeline to him.
Hmm.
But if I had walked away, I wouldn't have a tie to him at all. Frederick Buechner says that doubt is the ants in the pants of faith.
Oh,
Or it's like a grain of sand in your shoe.
yeah.
You have this thing that's really bugging you.
Hmm.
You can't really go on unless you stop and address that grain of sand
Hmm.
and deal with it. And you really can't you can't enjoy what you're doing. The other beautiful thing is when you think about a grain of sand in your shoe being that doubt or that question, if you're on this little detour path, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get another grain of sand. You're going to get a
That's
lot of grains
truth.
of sand.
And that journey, that commitment to or willingness to ask those questions, that's part of the equipping for the next little grain of sand that wedges its way
Mhm.
in there.
Yes.
Let's just take a slight turn. There's so many things you said in your book that captured my attention, but this was probably one of the most halting ones to me. You put it this way: regret and grace can't be roommates. A lot of our listeners are here because they are carrying regret of their own choices, decisions that they've made that they wish they had gone back and done differently. And the truth is that regret is part of the weight of truth. We know the truth. And if we have not either walked in it or we haven't understood it, there is all this fallout that comes as a result of it. Tell us more about what you mean.
Well, and part of being a fixer and part of it being that control being such a hard question is that I like to have things the way I wanted to have them. And I was sort of I didn't ever want to be associated with something that wasn't
Hmm.
done the right way. And I think God had a little bit of a sense of humor when I ended up through really, as far as I know, no fault of my own, with this diagnosis that has the word failure built right
Hmm.
into it. And so every time I go check in anywhere, when I go through the airport, I have to say heart failure and I have to own that. But part of that is hemmed in regret because I mentioned it was a chronic progressive disease, but it has a much better prognosis if it's discovered early. And they
Sure.
have much better intervention that can lead to a better quality of life. I explained mine away.
Hmm.
I ignored it.
Mhm.
And I can look back now and say, uh, for maybe 10 years, I had symptoms that I just didn't recognize as heart related. I like to think that it snuck up on me in 2015. And in a way it did. But my husband, my children, my friends were saying,
Hmm.
you're having trouble with this incline. You seem very out of breath. And I was just like, I need to get in shape, middle age, menopause, whatever it was, I was explaining it away. My husband
Sure.
runs marathons. He's in shape. I'm not. My kids play sports. I don't. That's what I was telling myself, but I didn't listen to the people that love me.
Mm.
And I didn't share completely and honestly with my doctor at every visit. When he would ask me about exercise, I'd be like, "Yep," and thinking, "Tomorrow I'm gonna start." I mean, tomorrow.
Tomorrow that will be true.
Yes. I can look back now and see that if I had done things differently, things would be different for me now.
Mm.
And I have to learn to extend grace to myself
Mm.
for missing that, for ignoring that, and ultimately shortening my life,
Mm.
honestly.
Mhm.
And I even today have guilt in not being able to show up as the mom and now as the new grandmother. Regret and grace can't be roommates. That that is something I wrestled with because I wanted to have God's grace,
Mm.
but in my mind, I wanted to hold on a little bit to regret because I was still a little bit mad at myself. Ultimately, what I learned is that we don't wanna make those mistakes. We don't want to have regret about something we didn't do or should have done. But if that happens, that becomes this opportunity for you to experience God's grace in a way that you might not have before.
Mm.
There's a Japanese art form called kintsugi. When you have something broken and it's
Mm.
put back together, where
Mhm.
those break lines are just gold. And that's what grace, I think, is
Mhm.
because we can't have those golden lines without being broken first. And sometimes it's things we did or we didn't do. And sometimes it's generationally, you might be living in the shadow of someone else's hard story. You can still be put back together.
Mhm.
In Second Corinthians chapter 12, it says that, you know, our weakness is how God's power is perfected. That beauty is brought about by the weakness that we had, by that cracking that we had.
Mm.
And when I could lean into that and know that the story that I had isn't the story that I wanted. It's
Mm.
not the story I would have written,
Mm.
but it's an opportunity to embrace this life that God has given me. It's a different one than I thought I was going to have, but it's still beautiful. And I worried about, as mothers, I think we worry about our children a lot, but I worried about how this was all going to set with them. I'm not the mom,
Mm.
my oldest daughter, I'm a different mom to her than I was to my youngest daughter after I had heart
Sure.
failure. And I realized that my youngest daughter, though, got a front row seat to see resiliency, to see me lean on God's hope when there was no hope. She got to see that I'm trusting God to handle something that this world can't handle. That gave me this renewed purpose in the life that God has given me at this point. And so I hope that will help someone else that's living with regret because that's such a strong feeling. Sometimes it can just rewrite your day and your week in your life. And I hope that's not the case.
When I think about grace, I often have working in my head, what's at stake if we miss this? What do we lose? What are we walking away from if we don't understand this? And what's so beautiful about your story, Lorianne, is as I'm hearing you talk about your younger daughter and her having a front row seat to your faith formation and foundation, you are giving her what your mother gave to you all
Mm,
those years ago.
mhm,
That's her starting place to be able
mm.
to find faith that is her own because she sees you have what you saw your mother had. Just
Oh,
beautiful.
it
Yeah.
gave me a chill, Jennifer.
Well, that's
Thank
what
you
you're
for saying that.
doing. That's what you're doing. In Kintsugi, the Japanese will also talk about how those what we call grace lines, they actually strengthen
Mm,
the piece of art that's in front of us because it takes those places where vulnerability caused a break and strengthens it. Not that it's not going to break in another place, but it adds strength where there hadn't been strength before. This is February, which is Heart Awareness Month. What were some of those symptoms you didn't recognize, the ones that you disregarded because you were worried about being I get that, hypochondriac? You don't want to be the person at the doctor all the time, but help us understand, because we have people listening right now who are wondering, is Lori Ann's story part of my story?
Yes. Personally for me, and they can be so many different warning signs, but for me, they all centered around this inability to exercise. I remember signing up for a Couch to 5K with my oldest daughter the year before I was diagnosed. And if you've done a Couch to 5K, it's
I
literally
have.
couch.
Literally, it is. It's more walking than running for a very
Yes.
long time.
I mean, day one is like stand up,
I know, I love it. 30 seconds of movement and you're done for the day. Okay, I got that.
Exactly. So if you've done that, I got to like day 3 and I'm like, I can't do it.
Mm.
I was so embarrassed that I had, difficulty with inclines, any kind of staircase, I would be out of breath, severely out of breath at the top, or just an incline on a hill, any kind of walking up. And that shortness of breath that I had, I don't even think I knew what shortness of breath was, but
Okay.
just not being able to catch your breath. And I heard someone recently talk about this fake cough. So if you're at the top of a staircase and you're doing a fake cough, you're trying to catch your breath, and that's a warning
Huh.
sign.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah. So, and it may not be heart
Mm.
related. I don't want to scare people, but I think what is helpful is that when something's not right or something's different or something's changed. And that's when you need to talk to your doctor, because I didn't do that. I just thought it's not a big deal. My dad had lung cancer. I thought, people have real problems. This is not a real problem.
Mhm.
But one of the funniest ones that I want to share with you is I was going through the list of warning signs with my kids, and I went through inability to exercise, rapid heart rate, fatigue, all that. And I said, but there's another one I didn't have, and that was a constant dry cough. And
Okay.
my youngest daughter said, Mom, you've always had a constant dry cough. She,
Interesting.
she said, when we would lose you in Walmart, that's how we find you.
Oh my goodness. I mean, this is such an example, right, of how we're not always aware
Yeah.
of what's going on inside of us, but we need to lean into that community, those people around us, to be the voice that
Yes.
says, yeah, that dry cough, that's how we found you.
Yes. And I want to
Mm.
add to
Mm.
that, not only community saying, are you okay? Something
Mhm.
seems off with you, but also share it with your doctor.
Yeah.
Even if it seems wrong, because there are so many symptoms, diabetes and breast cancer and heart failure and empathy, so many different things. The symptoms and our heads are spinning with, but what you really need to do is just be aware when something is different.
Mm.
And if your doctor says that's
That's
a
helpful.
normal part of aging, then you check that off and you
Mm.
skip to your car and go. But at least it's on somebody's radar, you
Yeah.
know?
And I appreciate that phrase too, on someone's radar, because they can only work with what we give them and what we share. So, listeners, as you're out there, let's take heed of some symptoms. If you've had a dry cough for a long time, mention it to your doctor. If you're getting unusually fatigued or tired when it seems like you shouldn't be, pay attention and go talk to your doctor. One of the questions I like to ask my guests is about scriptures that have rooted you in God's grace. Before our interview, you mentioned Hebrews 11. Would you share with us more about that passage and why that speaks God's grace to you?
That is one that I actually came into pretty far into this heart failure journey, but it's Hebrews 11:13, and in Hebrews chapter 11 it talks about a lot of the faith heroes we recognize. But then in verse 13 it says that they were all living by faith when they died, but they did not see the things promised. And I thought how different that was than what my expectation was. I wanted to see the things promised in my lifetime.
Mm.
I wanted to have my story make sense and that come to a full circle, and I understood the story arc. But I think what the Spirit is trying to relay in that chapter is that we may not see the finished end of our story in our lifetime. And that's part of faith, is trusting that God has a storyline that's bigger than us. It's bigger than our lives. It's bigger than this circumstance we're carrying. You know, it'd be like if we had this huge book and we were just going to read one chapter, our chapter, and we wanted the
Yeah.
whole story to make sense from our chapter. God's still writing the story, even when we get to the end of our part and it just doesn't seem to make sense. And so I took a lot of comfort in that, because we all know people who are faithful people who have done everything as far as we know that God had expected them to, and brought others to Christ. And it seemed like their life ended in a way that didn't make sense.
Yeah.
But the comfort that I took is that we're putting God on a timeline that we shouldn't be. He's looking at the bigger picture. He's writing a much bigger, more impactful, more consequential story than just the story of our lifetime.
What a beautiful image of God's grace. What we can't see, we don't deserve, we didn't earn, we don't understand, and yet still he continues writing beyond ourselves. Thank you for helping us see that in a new way. And it occurs to me that that passage actually goes back to your third question, right? Is God enough? I am also a firm believer that grace grows in the giggles. And I know there are some things that make you laugh these days. Lorianne, what makes you giggle?
Without a doubt, two things. I would say my miniature dachshund, and if you have a dachshund, that's, you know what I'm talking about. They have an attitude, and
I
and
don't, but my uncle did, and I get it.
yes. They know, and they kind of run the house. But the second one, and honestly, she trumped my little dachshund, is my granddaughter.
Oh.
She's almost 3, and what she says to me are the most beautiful and the funniest things. My daughter's expecting her second child, and I saw my daughter leave the screen, and my granddaughter leaned in to FaceTime, and she said, "Mommy has a baby in her belly."
Wait,
And
she hadn't told you yet?
well,
That's one way to find out.
I was like, I didn't know at that point if, you take it
Oh,
with a
yeah.
grain of salt.
She's 3, so sure.
But I had that in my mind, and then I started piecing more
Oh.
together and realized that it was true. But I'll always remember that Hazel was the one that told me about her brother.
that. What a blessing. You know, as she grows up and gets older, she's going to remember that story too. I told Grandma that you were coming to us. Lorianne, how can people get in touch with you? Obviously, your book, Divine Detour, is available for sale, but I know you also have a beautiful website.
Yeah, so my website is loriannwood.com, and there's a blog tab, but there's also a books tab that shows a trailer for the book, and you can even read the first chapter free before you buy it.
And you have an audio version as well, right?
Yes, an audio version came out last year, and I'm excited to tell you that it's being translated into Spanish, and that will be out later this year.
Congratulations. That
Thank
is
you.
wonderful. So, my Spanish speaking listeners, run and get a copy of Divine Detour by Lorianne Wood. And you have some freebies available on your website as well.
Yeah, 5 prayers and promises when you can't talk to God, which is where I was in those early
Sure.
months. And that's just loriannwood.com/hope. And if anyone would be interested in those heart failure warning signs, there's a chart in there that you can get, and that's loriannwood.com/heart.
So be sure to check the show notes and you'll have all the links you need to connect with Lorianne. My new friend, would you be willing to close us out in prayer today?
Of course, I'd love
Thank
to.
you.
Father God, I just thank you for community, for your all knowing design and putting us together with people who love us, who support us, who are there for us when we're detoured and when we're walking a path we don't want to be on. I want to remember, God, I want to always know that you are a God of healing,
Mm,
but also that sometimes that healing is here, but not always. Sometimes it's on the other side of eternity. But that doesn't take away from the fact that you are a God of healing and that you're also, at the same time, a God who's not afraid of our questions, our doubts. You are a God who just wants to keep the conversation going with us. And we've seen that throughout scripture,
mm,
throughout human history. Help us remember that you're a God who has good plans, um, even when it seems like a broken plan from our angle. We know, Lord, and we trust that it's you and it's your grace that carries us through this life and on into the next. And we thank you for the
mm,
opportunities that you've given us to just be with one another, to support each other on that path, because it's not easy, and you know that. And we thank you for your son who did walk that path for us. In Jesus' name
mm.
we pray. Amen.
Amen. Lorianne, thank you for leading us to be more aware of potential heart condition symptoms, but more importantly than that, sharing your story of deepened faith through some of life's hardest questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Friends, we all know someone who's been impacted by heart disease or other heart conditions that have become painfully debilitating. But they don't have to be a place that's void of God's grace, of His touch, of deepened faith and growth in Him. Lorianne's story is a powerful one that reminds us that God's grace is present all around us. And sometimes it becomes more clear as we ask some of life's hardest questions. So if today's episode has been a blessing to you, or you can think of a friend who would be encouraged by our conversation, then would you pass this along? And if you're not already subscribing or signed up to receive my weekly letter, Grace Notes, then sign up at the link in the show notes. As always, you can find me at jennifersakata.com, on Instagram at jennifersakata, or on Facebook at jennifersakata.author. Until next time, friend, live the grace life generously. Grace for you, grace for them.